Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. This week we are talking about Dear John, the 80s sitcom written by John Sullivan, more famous for Only Fools and Horses. My name is Alan. I am here with my good colleague Gareth.
Hello.
Hello. So Gareth, we're back. Dear John this time. This is probably the least well-known or well-remembered of the shows we've done so far.
Well, yeah, I picked this one. So for listeners' benefit, I'm 9 years older than you. So I remember Dear John. I was born in 1975, so I was sort of 11, 12 when this was on. And I remember it. I remember it being quite funny, but a little bit unusual and a little bit alien to me, and I didn't really understand the world of divorcees. But I remember
Do you feel like this is an accurate portrayal of the world of divorcees?
Well, I don't know. I've no experience of that. But we're going to talk about the characters in a minute. But obviously, the most eye-catching character is Kirk St. Moritz.
Yeah.
And I do remember him very clearly as this sort of ridiculous, cartoonish character. But it was interesting watching it again that, to some extent, it felt like all the characters were very cartoonish, which perhaps we'll go on to speak about. But it was, I mean, you can perhaps tell me more about where it sat when it came out, but from my memory, it was a peak time, prime time BBC sitcom, and, lots of people watched it.
Obviously, I consider myself something of a sitcom aficionado. That's why I do the show. But this is the first thing we've done, which I have not only not seen prior to us deciding to do it. I didn't really know anything about it either. The one thing I knew was that it was John Sullivan, obviously hot off the back of Only Fools and Horses.
Well, hang on, when you say off the back of, Only Fools and Horses must have been going for quite a while by then.
Yeah, definitely. It had been going on for 5 years at that point.
Because I'm quite interested to know why. What, did he take a holiday from Only Fools and Horses? When we talked about other writers, for example, Carla Lane, she did Butterflies and then she stopped doing that and then she did Bread. Was this in a gap between Only Fools and Horses? Was it at the same time? How did it work?
No, it was all really at the same time. I mean, he'd also done Just Good Friends.
Oh, wow. I didn't know. I remember that. I didn't know he'd written that too.
Yeah, which was concurrent with Only Fools and Horses. Yeah, he was just writing two things at once, basically. And, these things are generally 6 episodes a year. So to do 12 episodes a year is not unrealistic, really. I mean, if you're just one guy churning stuff out, that's probably as good as it gets. But certainly we could argue, as we'll be getting onto this later, that perhaps the second series of Dear John didn't get 100% attention.
Well, yeah, so that's interesting you should say that. So just for the benefit of the listeners, the episode we're going to focus on today is from season 1. It's episode 5 called Toby. Mm-hmm. But yes, in terms of researching, we watched, I think you probably watched them all. I watched 4 episodes from series 1 and a couple from series 2. And it was interesting to note the difference in quality. Yeah, I think that's probably a fair word. It just seemed to have, everyone seemed to be taking it a little bit more easy.
Yeah, I mean, is this a good point to get into a bit of John Sullivan history? That might be the best way to start.
Yeah, let's do that. I guess at some point we'll cover Only Fools and Horses, and there'll be a lot to say. So maybe we get John Sullivan done now.
Well, I think that the great thing about John Sullivan is when you look into his past, it is kind of what you want it to be. Like, he's just a bit of a cheekny cockney barra boy who is left school at 15 with no real serious education, but really liked stories and telling stories and reading stories, big fan of Charles Dickens and all this sort of thing. So he obviously had some kind of inspiration. Did a whole range of working class jobs, worked on markets and all this sort of stuff. All this stuff that you can tell informs Only Fools and Horses, certainly. He wanted to write. He wrote things and was trying to get them made. The BBC weren't paying any attention. So he thought, well, best thing to do, get a job at the BBC. And then I'm there, I'm in the nerve centre, and I can do anything. So he gets a job, the only job he can get, which is working in the props department, just shifting stuff around. And, I mean, the story goes, I've heard this sort of from the horse's mouth, so to speak, in interviews. But it seems hard to believe that basically he was working on the props thing, he's working on Porridge, and he sort of just slips a script to Ronnie Barker with some of his sketches and goes, "Oh, check these out, mate." and like I say, it really suits kind of an idea of John Sullivan as a sort of cheeky
chappy,
like a Del Boy kind of trying to do a dodgy deal.
Yeah.
But Ronnie Barker liked them, and he got some sketches on the two Ronnies.
But there wasn't that. Weren't they very very solicitous with scripts for the two Ronnies? It was basically open. Anyone could send in scripts, and if they were good enough, they would get made.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, that seems like a very open, just somebody.
I mean, that might be a slight exaggeration, but I have heard that before. That a lot of people, their first TV work was, I sent a script into the two Ronnies.
As we've seen before on this very podcast and people we've looked at before, so many people start out just writing sketches, and that's how you get your foot in the door at the BBC, basically.
But I guess the difference is that Sullivan already had his feet in the door because he was doing the prop work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then at some point he managed to get to Dennis Main Wilson, who was one of the producer at the BBC, and gave him the script, which was the pilot for what became Citizen Smith.
Oh, okay.
And from what I've heard, again, in interviews and stuff, they were just like, yeah, this is great writing. It's perfect. We don't even mess with it. Let's just make it. It kind of sounds a bit too good to be true, but it just seems like John Sullivan's such a good writer and could write. But I was thinking about this, in terms of how often we'll see, certainly in these earlier sitcoms, our writers being people who were not necessarily like really educated in literature or writing, so when we did Rising Damp, Eric Chappell was working, for the gas board or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And just wrote plays and stuff in his spare time. Yeah. And I think particularly with sitcom, because it's so dialogue heavy, that comes much more naturally than, say, if you're trying to write a novel.
It's easier to write. It's just dialogue. I was going to say anyone can write dialogue. Of course, not anyone can write dialogue, but you don't necessarily need any technical expertise.
That's it, isn't it? It's not necessarily easier. It's just perhaps comes more naturally if you just go around talking and speaking to people. You learn it all just in the sort of in the school of hard knocks, so to speak, rather than Oxbridge. So
yes.
It favours that somewhat.
Well, there's an interesting path then for John Sullivan to go from working class hero Citizen Smith to Barrow Boys, Del Boy and Rodney through to a middle class divorcee teacher.
Yeah,
John.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I've really heard about John Sullivan, or that I've heard him say, is that he, I write what I know, so that's makes sense. When he wrote Citizen Smith, I mean, he was in his sort of late 20s by that point, but it was about him being a kind of idealistic youth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Only Fools and Horses, it's about the sort of people he met in his day-to-day life when he was working these kind of more working class jobs and working on the market stalls and stuff. Fun characters that you meet down the Nag's Head,
So you're telling me his wife had left him?
Well, no, I'm telling you that his wife hasn't left him, and they were married for 37 years until he died. So perhaps that could tell us something about Dear John.
Okay, about his lack of familiarity with the material.
Well, that was what really struck me, because even Just Good Friends, it's about a couple getting together and the problems with that. We've all been through that. The guy was married.
Yeah.
He'd been through that. And the things we see in Dear John, like obviously he's going through a divorce, and I can't speak for John Sullivan. I know that he was married until he died. And there's no information to suggest they split up and just never divorced or anything like that. So has he been through that process of separation, of not being able to see your kid until like every Sunday? I don't know.
But what interests me, Alan, is that I think the situation in this sitcom is not really anything to do with the separation. The episode that we're going to talk about, you see his ex-wife and his son. But really, most of the main situation is the one-to-one club. It's this group for divorcees, and they're our main characters. So it's not really about divorce. It's about connecting with other people and that kind of middle-aged awkwardness and just trying to re-find your position in life.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of my main complaints with this episode is that this is episode 5, and it's the first time we see the wife. It's the first time we see the child. And they don't become regulars. We see them a couple more times in series 2.
Yeah.
But I really feel like, this is a great material. Like the wife, there's the other man as well that used to be his friend. And like there's so much there if you actually build these characters up and write them well. It feels like that's really good fodder for a situation.
That's a different one though, isn't it? It's a different
situation. Well, you're right.
Situation.
It's not the situation we actually get here.
Yeah.
So in the very first episode, he's going to find this one-to-one club. It's in a community centre, and he's trying to find a bunch of people who look kind of lonely and lost. And he accidentally goes into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Nice little gag with all that.
It's a gag that you see coming a mile away, isn't it?
I don't know. I think it worked very nicely. I was all right with that. But you're right. This could just as easily be, Dear John, he's an alcoholic and he goes to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's the kind of the bunch of misfits that are just, that's what they have in common.
Yeah, well, the joke, the premise of that joke is he looked into the room and it looked like a group of divorcees and it was a group of alcoholics, and what's the difference? And that's the premise of the mix-up. But yes, you're right. It wouldn't be a different situation, would it?
Yeah, and also to note, of our main characters, one of them is just a liar who's never been married at all. One of them was in an arranged sort of marriage of convenience for 3 hours. Like, they're not divorcees as in, we were together 10 years, my whole life was falling apart.
No, they're not relating to each other on that level,
exactly, which is what happened to John. And in fact, none of them have kids except him. Those main ones in the first series. Mrs. Arnott does, but they're not mentioned, and they're grown up, and
she's a background character.
Yeah.
Well, literally, she sits behind everyone else.
But yeah, you're right. Actually, I hadn't quite put it into those words, but yeah, this isn't about divorce at all, is it?
No, I think it's. I may be overselling it here, but I think it is about that middle-aged dread and having to reinvent yourself and thinking, what does the rest of my life? I'm 44 as I'm saying this, and as the words are coming out of me, I think, oh my God.
Okay, so interestingly then, that we have picked an episode that really does focus on the fallout of divorce and how that's affecting his life. But, ultimately that's what informs the character, whether that is the central theme of the show or not. It's certainly John's central driving force. Right down to the very opening credits. The opening credits, we see him receiving the Dear John letter and then moving out. Well, we see him outside the courthouse looking positive, optimistic, and then coming out looking like a broken man.
I think that the opening credits are extraordinary. I remember the music very clearly, and I kind of had this memory of weird opening credits. But you're right, they're not uplifting. They're the opposite of uplifting.
Dear John, dear John, by the time you read these lines, I'll be gone.
As you say, we see him basically going through the process of a divorce, being kicked in the guts 3-4 times in the course of the credits. We see the note itself. There's that sort of, I don't want to call it heartbreaking music because that would elevate it a bit much, but it's not. I did notice actually that John Sullivan wrote the theme tune. Didn't sing.
He does. He writes the theme tune, sings the theme tune.
Yeah,
not
he
this
doesn't
one.
sing it.
He does sing some of them, but this needed a high-pitched woman's voice. So.
But my point is, it is not. I don't think it's a good introduction to the program because it's sort of telling us a little bit of a story. There's a bit of narrative in there, but you don't need that after the first episode. Maybe it's just getting you in this hangdog mood. Oh God, it's Dear John. That's how I felt.
Hangdog is certainly the mood, of John himself. You have actually hit on a major problem with the show, that the main character, our central protagonist, is a bit depressing and not in a funny way.
He's pathetic. Yes. I mean that in the sense that he has pathos. He's very sad. He's just tragic. I sympathise with him because, he's been through a lot, the lad. But I don't like him. It's like, I wouldn't want to have a drink with him. I would think, oh God, I'm stuck with John. Oh God.
But that's it. He's kind of the quintessential nice guy. He's trying to keep everyone happy, even to the point where, like you say, he's been kicked in the guts with his divorce, but he's still like, no, the wife, she needs to look at, I've got the kid to think of, it's not, his best friend has betrayed him, but it's like, oh, well, at least he's looking after her. She's got someone, that is really annoying to watch in someone. And he has these moments of anger. We'll see this a bit in the episode we look at. He has these little moments of anger and they're immediately diffused, immediately dissipated, and he kind of
he is a nice bloke. Like, he's a lovely guy, and he's very thoughtful about other people and what they need. And the comedy comes from the fact that the people around him are thought less, and so he tends to be the brunt of everything.
Yes,
but that doesn't make him interesting.
Yeah, and it doesn't make him likable either. That's kind of the problem.
Should we talk about the episode then? So episode 5, Toby. This basically consists of 3 scenes. We have the one-to-one club to start off with. Then John goes to he spends the day with his son Toby, and then sees his ex-wife Wendy afterwards. And then we finish off with this party for all the one-to-one people.
Yep.
They're not enormously connected, those 3 scenes, are they? They feel like 3 separate little playlets.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly typical of Dear John. Yeah. It is all connected, obviously. It's just kind of his life. But it kind of feels like this is... It can't decide if it's an ensemble show about the one-to-one club or if it's about John. Obviously, it's about John. It's called Dear John. He's the one we follow on things. But he's also the least interesting character of the lot. And so...
That's the problem, isn't it? That's it in a nutshell.
When we see them all together, that's a lot more interesting. And in fact, episode 1, obviously, where he meets them all, but then episode 2 is basically the whole thing is just in the group. And it gives us a chance to flesh out the characters a little bit.
Just really establish the relationships between them, don't
Yeah, and it's probably my favourite episode just because that's what I want the show to be. Like, this group. And it's an ensemble thing. We can follow them. And then one week, Ralph's depressed because his terrapins died. So everyone goes to his house and they do that.
They have all these social engagements, don't they? We talk about social engagements, and Louise says, Halloween fondue at Mrs. Haddock's isn't firm.
There's a lot... There's a lot of sort of vague, very vague. Is that an innuendo? Is that? I
don't know if it is. I don't know, but I liked it. It's a lovely turn of phrase.
There's a lot of that goes on, particularly with Louise's character. Yeah.
So we have Louise, who's the chair, the convener, the leader of the group.
Yeah.
And she feels like she's very of her time as a character. One of those 1980s Sloaney women. And she says, "Yeah, shall we do this? Yeah," which was very kind of Princess Diana at the time.
We won't be the only ones there, dear. This isn't the only night the one-to-one club meets. We have our Monday night people who meet on Monday nights, yeah? Then there are the Wednesday night people who meet on Wednesday nights, and we are the Friday night people because...
Oh, that's a toughie, Louise.
Yes. Well, then every so often we all get together and have a little disco party, something like that. You'll enjoy it.
See, I find Louise, I think she, as a character, is the right balance for a big comedy character in this show. But I also feel like she should be the far end of that. And I don't think she is. I think like she's the right balance, and then we're going to see some more who are just a bit too far the other way.
Yeah. I don't like her as a character. I don't mean in the sense that you just made. But, I just think she's not a very nice person. Which, if you're trying to coordinate a group of vulnerable individuals, then, she doesn't seem appropriate.
This is another, like I say, this is another element that just, we never quite get hold of. Like, what is Louise? We don't get much of a backstory for her, other than, her husband was into some kinky stuff, so she left him. But then she's obviously gagging for it all the time. Like, she's always going, there's this whole bit where she's kind of trying to get in bed with John, like, but she's not really that committed to it. She can be quite nasty, but then she wants to support everyone. She started a support group because that she gets her kicks out of that or whatever. Like,
she likes to be in charge. She likes to be the social hostess, and for things to rotate around her.
Yeah. So Louise is the leader of the group, and our other sort of principal characters are. Let's talk of Ralph.
Well, so Ralph Rafe,
which I do love that as a little gag. Louise always calls him Rafe because she's just posh.
She's pretentious. She's a yuppie. But she's not posh. She's not posh. She's upwardly. She's a Sloane. She likes to think she's posh.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ralph, played by Peter Denyer, he just the weakest, boring stereotype of a character. It's not just a over-the-top character that doesn't really play on a nice, realistic level, but not interesting, not a new take on that either.
Yeah.
I just seem to spend every hour of the day and night stuck in my flat. There's no one to talk to, nothing to do. If it wasn't for my books on train spotting, I could become bored.
Like, if I said to you, like, do a nerdy train spotter voice. Oh, hello, I see I'm wearing my glasses. I like trains. But that's it.
Plaster on them.
Yeah, exactly. He's got plaster on his tape. And that is literally the first and end point of
the
character. And that's as good as it gets. It's pathetic, really. That's one of the main characters. And it doesn't develop throughout the series at all. It's not just like it starts there.
Well, we see in the second series he's a mobile DJ, which, and the hilarity comes from the fact that he's still the same nerd, just wearing a sparkly silver jacket.
Do that funky thing.
But that's it, exactly. So it's actually in the first series where he becomes a DJ, and we see the first time we see him, and he's going like, "Oh, get on down, everybody boogie," with no charisma at all. And then the second series, which is an episode you've seen, it's just the same joke. Like, don't worry, that's been done before. There's no extension.
I've missed nothing.
Yeah, so it obviously worked for you the first time.
So yeah, Ralph's very one-dimensional. His story is that he was married to a Polish bride, married for 5 hours before she left him.
Yeah.
Well, I thought what was interesting about this, just to give you a bit of social history, in 1987, a Polish bride was different to a Polish bride now. It's from, behind the Iron Curtain.
Yeah. Well, obviously the idea is as soon as she got the passport or whatever, the official, she can stay, she ran off.
Well, Brexit Britain, mate. We're back.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the other joke is that she was hideously ugly. That's a kind of long-running thing. Yeah. Just the fact that, obviously no worthy woman would be interested in him whatsoever. That's basically what we're driving at here.
So what's his function within the drama? Is it just to make John less pathetic? Just to enhance John's status within the group slightly?
Yeah, maybe it is. That's what I mean. I don't think it's got beyond, this is kind of a silly, funny character. And I don't think it's a particularly great performance either. I think that's something you could take off the page better and bring something to it.
How do you make that role? How do you play? You're an actor. How do you play that role better? There's nothing there. There's nothing to work with.
No, I mean, I'll grant you. I'm not I don't want to slag the guy off too much, but I think there's more to it. An obvious comparison here is, let's say, Trigger from Only Fools and Horses.
Yeah.
As originally written, a very one-dimensional character. Mm-hmm. And does get developed because it went on for so long. But Roger Lloyd Patt brings something to that character. He does bring something to it that not everyone could.
I get you. I think that's a fair comparison, yeah.
Basically, all I was thinking while watching Dear John is this is if you took all the supporting characters from Only Fools and Horses and put them together, but there's no Del Boy and Rodney to kind of give you any actual emotional pathos or anything, or any real kind of interesting characters. It's all just side characters made too big.
Yeah. Well, speaking of too big, let's talk about Kirk then. So he's the elephant in the room, almost literally. He's this ridiculous, cartoonish medallion man, 10 years too late.
Yeah.
And we find out at some point that he is potentially, this is all an act, and he's actually a pathetic, very similar to Ralph, lives with his mum, etc. But then he seems to pretend that that's because he's actually a spy, and that's his cover. But he's clearly, the character is acting. Yeah. The character is trying to be something he's not and overcompensating. But the effect of that on the drama is that the overcompensation just blows everything else out of the room.
Yeah. Let's take this on face value, first of all. The reveal that he is not what he seems comes in episode 6, the last episode of series 1. So let's deal with before that. Take him on face value of what he is. Yeah, he's a poser. He's got the medallion and all that, the open shirt. He's a 10-year out-of-date throwback, but he thinks he's cool.
Yeah, he looks like he should be in Shawaddy Waddy.
Yes, he's obnoxious, he's quite arrogant, he's offensive to people, but he doesn't really realise it. He doesn't do it deliberately.
But he is really offensive to people. He's so rude.
She was ugly. Really ugly.
How can you possibly know that when you've never met her?
She came from one of them commie countries, Bulgaria or somewhere.
She came from Poland.
Bulgaria, Poland, what's the difference? It's a well-known fact that the chicks from the Eastern Bloc are ugly.
Well, that's a stupid thing to say, isn't it?
Well, that's the sort of guy I am. Do you know what the other guys used to call me when I was in the Marines?
Dickhead.
They called me straight from the shoulder St. Moritz. If the truth hurts, tough.
Like, the joke is that he says the unsayable and he's rude and people are shocked, and that gets big laughs. But even compensating for the fact that it's a sitcom, the things he says in those first 10 minutes, no one would ever speak to him again. Never mind invite him to the pub and continue to be friends with him. He'd have been expelled from that group before the first meeting.
Yeah, well... The problem is that it becomes clear quite quickly that he is a phony and that this is a nonsense. And he tells stories about like, oh yeah, so I was on a mission in Bulgaria and this woman and I did this, and and even the characters in the space are like, oh god, here he goes again. You're just talking total nonsense.
They're rolling their eyes and thinking,
I'm a spy.
They know he's a liar.
Exactly. So when we get to episode 6, and there's this big reveal that he is in fact a bit of a sad, pathetic loser man living with his mum, it's not a big deal. And I've been reading on, like, part of my research, I'll try and find like forums, people talking about Dear John. I'm going to try and get an idea of what people think about it. And there's definitely a lot of people saying like, oh, I remember when that big reveal was such a shocking moment. You find out that he's not that. It's like, was it? Because I was not shocked at all. The fact that he's revealed to be something that, totally else makes perfect sense because we know the character's phony. The fact that what they've chosen to make... The fact that he's
exactly like Ralph is down to the cardigan.
Basically, Ralph is just poor writing.
Yes.
Like, it would just make much more sense. Plus, also, what we don't get is any real consequence of that. That's at the very end of Series 1. So you think, right, Series 2 is going to kick in and things are going to change. But even at the end of that episode, like, he obviously makes a choice that I'm not going to be myself. But as we see in Series 2, John doesn't treat him any differently. John knows. Everyone else knows, but maybe they don't really know. They thought it was a joke or something. I don't know. But nobody treats him any differently. He doesn't act any differently. And I think it would just be much more interesting for that character if, what we reveal about him is maybe he's married. But this was his kind of like escape from it, It's like living a fake life or anything. But also then how does that inform his character?
But then the consequences. Right? So how does his character evolve into the second series as a result? And of course, there's no evolution at all.
Does he turn up in Series 2 and he's a totally different character again and they just have to kind of accept it because they don't want to be rude and tell him he's a weirdo, Once again, yet another thing about Dear John that just we never get hold of. It's something that happens and then nothing comes of it. And that's my overriding thing with this whole thing. Half ideas that are poorly explored. But there is a sort of an exception to that in Kate, Belinda Lang's character, who is very normal and kind of quite straightforward.
Well, let's talk about Kate, because the big thing about Kate is that she's frigid. Yes. And that is a word that you just don't hear anymore.
Yeah, this is the thing, right? So that is obviously on paper. It's like, okay, this character's funny little thing is this. This character's funny little thing is so-and-so. And hers is, she's perfectly normal, except she's frigid. And like, in the episode where that is revealed, it is a bit of a like, big moment. Everyone laughs. It's a kind of a big thing. Yeah. And I'm just like, I know what it means, but I don't know why I'm supposed to like, what am I supposed to read into that?
Well, it's naughty, isn't it? It's talking about sex without actually talking about sex. Yeah. That's why the crowd do the big ooh. But yeah, it's just not a word that one would hear in 2020, is it?
But that's not just the word, but like the actual as a condition, I suppose. Is it even a thing? You just don't fancy it?
I don't know, but we are told that she's been divorced 3 times. So, although what I will say is my impression of Kate from what we see is that she's incredibly angry. She's furious, and she snaps at Kirk, who obviously deserves it because he's a dickhead. But she snaps. She's very highly strung.
I know I've got a problem. I have to face that problem every bloody day, but I choose not to broadcast it. Would you go around telling the whole world you've had 3 marriages break up because you're frigid?
I'm sorry, Kate. I didn't mean to.
You called our problem. This is like a 1 hour with me.
Dad, you see what you've done?
I said I'm sorry.
Did you never go and see a marriage guidance counselor?
Yes, my second husband ran off with her.
Well, I really like Kate as a character. Basically, my takeaway from Dear John is I wish it was Dear Kate. Like, having her as a central character, I think it would be much more interesting. She's much more engaging. I really like Belinda Lang in it as well.
Yeah.
I may have a slight retro crush on Belinda Lang in the 80s, it turns out.
I think I might have had a crush on her, yeah.
That may be influencing my opinions, but it turns out that's how I feel.
So let me ask you this, having watched all the episodes, does anything ever happen between her and John? Because there's a little bit of a flirtation, and then in one episode they get drunk and they sleep together, but, just literally sleep together. It feels like that's the will they, won't they of the drama.
It feels like it should be, doesn't it? It does. Like right from the beginning, we have these kind of wacky characters, and she's the normal one. So immediately think, oh, she's the one he's going to engage with. They've got obviously things in common. Like it seems like an obvious will they, won't they situation, and it's not. Yeah, episode 6, they end up getting drunk and sleeping together. We don't really know what happens. They don't either. So, but there's not a real good build up to that before it happens. It just happens, and then there's nothing after it either. It's just, and that is quite typical of Dear John, I found, is that there's a bit of potential and then it doesn't quite make it and then nothing happens. But yes, so what we open with this episode is the club all together, and I generally prefer these scenes with them all together. But actually this opens with a very rare moment of what appears to be sincere emotional outpouring. Kate is genuinely sad, and she's talking about how her marriages have failed, and it's weighing heavily on her.
But we immediately cut to Louise, who looks bored.
Yeah, exactly. This is like, why? I don't know. It just seems like an odd thing. Maybe the idea is that this is actually a genuine, like, emotional therapy thing, and that's boring. I just want to hear the gossip.
Like, you imagine that's what's happening at those sessions. You know, they are talking, they're talking about their lives and how they feel. And
Well, that's it. We see Ralph talk about that sort of thing quite a lot, but it always seems comedic because of the circumstances and the way he speaks and everything. And then whenever Kirk is talking, it's just lies, so it's always ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And we don't get much out of John, really. But yeah, this scene is pretty typical of the kind of one-to-one club bits. And then we have Mrs. Arnott, a classic bit of vibrator innuendo. Mm-hmm. Again, sort of innuendo. Never sort of like, it's sort of like, is that a euphemism? Because there's a bit where she says, "Oh, it's a mini attack alarm," and Kirk says, "No one's going to attack your mini." And I thought, is that a euphemism? Like, mini is a euphemism for something? But then he immediately goes, people steal, like, Fords and Mercedes-Benz. They don't steal minis. It's like, no, he meant it very literally about a mini. The joke is that she says mini attack alarm meaning small. He thinks he means the car.
Yeah. But
that's not funny. And at no point is that like a euphemism. I don't know. It's just a weird mess. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of weird lines. It's something I noticed about the show in general. This is about the production level, I guess. There's a lot of times where the timing just seems off. The delivery is just not quite right in terms of like what you would think it should be.
When I said earlier about it being very stagey, that's what I meant. There are particularly some of the supporting cast that are very overacty, very stage schooly. And that manifests itself in really weak delivery of the jokes, and the timings. It feels like they're sort of projecting to the studio audience rather than actually we're eavesdropping on a conversation.
Yeah, but even then, it's like, if you're going to do that, get the timing right, get the comic timing right. And a lot of these guys are experienced comic actors. It's not like they're just don't know what they're doing. And I don't know. It feels like it could be under-rehearsed, perhaps, something like that. I haven't got any background information on that, and there's no reason why it should be, more than anything else. And just for the record, the guy who shepherded this in, the producer and director, Ray Butt, had worked with John Sullivan on everything. He's the guy who brought Citizen Smith in. He started Only Fools and Horses. So there's no reason why suddenly that there's a dynamic there that's not working. That shouldn't be a problem. So there's quite a lot going on in that scene. Well, there's quite a lot that happens in that scene, but not a lot going on. It's all totally inconsequential.
There's a little bit of setup for the party at the end of the episode, but that's the only purpose of it, really.
They do bring up kids, which I think is, like, on a tonal level, that's going to set us up for John dealing with his son later on. And, we're talking about how the rest of them haven't got kids or anything like that. But again, it doesn't go anywhere. It's not like there's any point to any of it. We have a bit where Louise says she was going to adopt a Vietnamese baby, but there was too much paperwork, so she got a dog instead. That's a kind of a nice little gag. It's a throwaway little thing. And then there's this very long and pained setup to get to a joke, which is that Ralph would call his son Bing, and his surname is Dring, and therefore it would be Bing Dring. And now, the way I've just performed that is done with as much panache and speed as they do it, and got as big a laugh.
Did we know his name was Dring before that point? Because I didn't know where they were going with it, because I didn't know that was his surname.
I honestly don't know. I can't remember. But yeah, I think it's mentioned, but it's not like a big thing. It's just like, oh, my name's Ralph Dring, hello. But maybe not, actually, because I don't know. Maybe they made it up specifically for that joke.
It was certainly very laboured.
It's a long setup. There's this weird moment where there's a kind of, it's not a joke, it's just sort of comes to the end of a sentence, and then there's this sort of long pause. It's far too long for TV. It's like 2 seconds where nothing happens, as if they're waiting for a laugh and nothing comes. But it's not like there was a joke that didn't land. It's just, it wasn't a joke. And then they just move on to something else. It's so weird. And that is ultimately, I think, quite typical. There's just a weird atmosphere about this whole show that just doesn't quite work. Like I said, the timing's not quite there. And so also in this bit, we have Ralph talk about trying a dating agency and, you know, in the 80s.
Computer dating.
Computer dating, it's the future. They put their little punch cards into a machine.
I remember that being a thing. And it's... I mean, you know, you're younger than me. I got to tell you that computer dating, as they mean it, is a lot lower tech than you think. Basically, people would fill in a questionnaire and send it off in the post, and then someone with a computer somewhere would have a database and then send you someone else's questionnaire printed out. That's all it was. So basically, it was matchmaking. Yeah. Using a computer. But yeah, it was Tinder, it was not.
Well, I found it quite interesting because in Only Fools and Horses, in an episode that would have come out 2 years after this, Del Boy meets Raquel, who obviously ends up being the love of his life, through a computer dating agency.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which, you know, was just a sort of like, because I remembered that, it jumped out at me. Maybe it's a John Sullivan thing. Like, he'd heard about these computer dating agencies. He's like, oh, that's a good idea. I can use that.
I mean, I was a kid. I wasn't dating then, but I know about computer dating. It was a thing. It was a thing that people talked about.
Well, speaking of just putting this into the 80s, Kirk, in this particular scene, is not wearing his sort of traditional open shirt with giant crucifix. He's wearing a sort of a nice grey blazer with popped collar over a Rambo t-shirt. Did you notice that?
You know, I didn't notice that.
I'm pretty sure
Interesting.
It certainly appears to be Sylvester Stallone with a massive gun. So I think it was Rambo. Very of its time, I guess. Rambo.
Boxing gloves, Rocky. Machine gun Rambo.
Yeah, I feel like he's got a big Scarface poster on his wall somewhere.
Yeah. If his mum lets him.
But yeah, it's a rather typical scene of complete inconsequential nonsense involving the group, and I think that would be fine if the whole thing was part of the group and that was just like the 5-minute setup before we start getting into the plot. But it's not. It's just like, oh well, we better. I want to do this whole thing with the son and all that, but we better put these characters in because, you know, they're the characters we got. We committed to it now. It feels a bit half-arsed.
Well, let's move on to the bit with this son with Wendy. But as we move on to it, I think a whole episode of that would have been a bit too heavy, and that's probably the reason for leavening that with humour at the start and the end.
Yeah, I guess so. And obviously, this episode is about him dealing with the ex-wife and the son. That's what the episode is about. But it's like, oh, it's only come in at 17 minutes. What are we going to do? Okay, we'll just stick something big in the end. Well, that's all we've got time for this week, I'm afraid. You'll have to come back next time to find out how John got on with his ex-wife Wendy, and also hear us talking about the rest of that episode, as well as looking at the actors and what they did before and after Dear John. In the meantime, if you crave more sitcom discussion, then we do have a back catalogue that is now steadily increasing. Go and check out some of our other episodes. Lots of things to enjoy, and if you do enjoy them, please recommend us to a friend. Rate and review us on iTunes, anything you can do to help promote us, because we are still a fledgling podcast and we need all the boosts we can get. And of course, you can contact us on the social medias. We are at BritcomPod, and we're really enjoying all the feedback, so go and get in touch there. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you will be back next time.